Welcome to Awaken and Power TV. I'm your host, Ethann Fox. I've been gone for a couple of months as I've been working on the launch of our new magazine that we just launched a week ago. You can check it out at aaeexpo.com and click on the magazine tab at the top, and you'll be able to read or listen to a lot of the articles that we have posted recently. And as we go forward, we'll be adding a lot more content from not only a handful of our own journalists, but mostly as you go forward will be experts who are actually in the field. So a lot of the people I have as guests on our show will be writers for us for the magazine who are on the leading edge and reporting what's actually taking place in their fields of work and areas of expertise. So do check that out. And like I said, all the articles are also in audio form, so you can listen to it while you're on the go, as well as read it if you'd like as well. Today I'm joined by Miriam Delicado, an extraterrestrial contactee, and she shares with us today her experiences and physical contact with different extraterrestrial races, what she learned from them, and she also shares their message to us as a human civilization, including what the actual manifestations are at this time in the awakening of consciousness on the planet and with the human race. We go further into the different possible future timelines that are unfolding now in the world and where all of that is heading. So without any further delay, here's Miriam Delicado. Hi, Miriam. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Awaken and Power TV. It's a pleasure to have you with me today. And so where are you calling from right now?
Right now I'm calling from northern British Columbia, Canada, really far up in the north, and we're here having a beautiful day. Sun's shining, so I'm very happy, and it's great to be here. I'm sure today's program is going to be fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm looking forward to learning more about you. And so maybe we could start with a little bit of background about you prior to this whole journey that's sent your life in a very interesting direction. What was your life like, and even your childhood? Was there anything unusual or anything interesting? I know there are some interesting stories with your father, which I'll get into that a little bit later more specifically, but can you tell me a bit about your background?
Sure. My history and why it is that I'm even in the public is very detailed. I've had a very interesting life, and even now, as I'm just sitting in front of you, my thoughts zoom back in my life, especially over the last 30 years, and it's a fascinating journey that I've been on. So I think that it's easier for the audience to start in 1988 for me to tell the story about why we're even having this conversation today. I was a girl living in northern British Columbia, Canada, living a very normal life as a 22-year-old girl, and but I have to say that I was always a little bit different. Throughout my life, growing up, I was always very gifted psychically. Those gifts started when I was extremely young. By the time I was 2 years old, I started to be able to look at someone and be able to read their mind, for example. I remember playing a game doing this when I was a child, and if I saw or heard a thought that I didn't like, I would kind of switch the channel by looking at someone else and change it and then block out that person. So my gifts, as far as being psychic, started when I was very young. By the time I was about 13, it was extensive experiences that I was having. I was remote viewing. I could find people by sitting down and thinking about them and know exactly where they were, this kind of thing. And then as I was growing up, even with these gifts, which I didn't fully understand, I still knew that I was different somehow. People around me all knew that I was different. But I was living a very, quote, what I would call a normal life, meaning I wasn't walking around to people telling them about this. My good friends knew. My family most certainly knew. And I was rather confused by it at points in my life when I was growing up, and because I didn't have anyone around to ask about it. And at that time, I mean, there was no internet. There were no massive books and magazines out there to help me through this process. So it was very much my internal sense that brought me through this and educated myself as to how to control my abilities and so forth. So when I was 19, I moved to Vancouver, the city, and I lived there for a few years. And then when I was 22 years old, something very significant happened, because this spiritual awakening within myself started to have I started to have really strange experiences. And one in particular was being in my house in the afternoon, and all of a sudden I felt like I had to lay down for a nap in the middle of the afternoon. So I went to lay down, and the actual second that my head hit the pillow, I was flying through a tunnel, and I could see stars and all sorts of spirals on either side. And I got to the end of the tunnel, and what looked like a man and a woman, beautiful. The woman had blonde hair and the man had dark hair. They sat and talked to me, and they were wearing white robes. And all that happened at that point was I woke up all of a sudden, and I couldn't remember anything they said to me. Not a word, but I remembered them crystal clear. And I just got up and I packed my things. And because I was living with someone at the time, I packed my things and I went to my friend's house, just out of the blue. And then when I got there, within a couple of days, they said, "Oh, do you want to take a trip north to my hometown?" And I said, "Sure." So we came up, and I visited my family, and like most 22-year-olds, I went out that night, the night before we left, and I was drinking and having fun with my friends. One of the questions that I get asked, and I make a point of sharing this, is that I do not do drugs, and I did not do drugs that night. Very important point. I woke up the next morning, I was hungover, I wasn't feeling well, got in the car and started traveling back south with 3 adults in the car and a child, and then myself. So it's an extremely long drive to go back down. And on that journey, I was in the back seat of the car, and I was sleeping. And then all of a sudden, I had this man and woman come to me again. And it was very, very, it was sort of jolting, to see this happen again. And they told me, they said, "Do not be afraid. We are coming for you soon. Do not be afraid. We are your friends. We are your family." So I woke up startled in the backseat of the car again. And I was shaken to my core over this, because this was the second time this had happened to me. And it was as real as sitting here with you, for example. It was as real as me being in this room. So I'd never experienced this. This is not something that had been happening to me over and over as a child, for example. So it was really almost disturbing to me sitting there in the car, and I felt like I couldn't say anything to anyone in the car either. So when I woke up, there were 2 of us in the back seat of the car, and myself and a woman changed out for the driver, because they'd been driving for a very long time. So I was in the passenger seat, and my friend was driving, and almost immediately, it was very late at night at that point, and almost immediately we saw what we thought was a big truck come up behind the car. Now, I say that because what we know with the brain, what we've learned through even science, is that if the mind cannot make sense of something, that it tends to try to make sense of it by filling in blanks and making up something up. Okay, so this is also why people have questioned the authenticity of certain things that people like myself have happen. In this particular case, I thought it was a truck, because what else would it be? Why would you think that it would be anything else? So it was a little higher than normal. It was two balls of light that looked like they were about this big. And they just sort of traveled along the road behind us. And then as soon as a car would come towards us, or we would go past through a small town or past a house with lights on, these two lights would fall behind and then drift away. And this went on for several hours. So the other part of this that's fascinating is that we have to remember that the year was 1988, the time of radio stations that hardly had any range, first of all. So we actually had a cassette player in the car going all the way back to the time of, cassettes that we had to listen to. And all of a sudden the radio station would pop on, and it would start, we'd start hearing music. And then you could hear the radio host saying that the station was from somewhere down in New Mexico. And I thought, how on earth are we picking up a radio station from New Mexico in the United States? And it was really kind of disturbing, trying to figure out what was going on. And then as soon as these lights would fall back, that radio station would cut out and it would be gone again. So that's an interesting little tidbit. This went on for hours and hours and hours. And finally we went through a very small town called 100 Mile House. And for the longest time I thought it was another town, but it's actually called 100 Mile House. And so we went from one end to the other, and you have to know that you come down a little hill and then go directly straight through, and then you go back up another little hill on the other side, and that's driving through the town. So we did that, and we got all the way to the other end, and it was very late at night, so there was no cars in sight anywhere. And when we got to the other side and we just turned the corner, we were in forested area again. All of a sudden, boom. Immediately, I said to her, there is no way, because I looked back and they weren't there, and I said, there's no way that they're going to show up again. There's no way. I said that, I blinked, and poof, there were the lights behind us again. So at that point, my friend starts screaming, and she's saying, oh my God, where did they come from? You were supposed to watch for them. And I said, I don't understand. And, what's going on? What's going on? So we start screaming. The people in the back I don't know at that point if they were starting to wake up or not. I don't remember that. But what I do remember is all of a sudden myself screaming at this woman saying, stop the bleeping car now. It's not you they want, it's me. And I looked at her and my hand reached out like this, and I was about to grab the steering wheel to make her pull over the car, because she wasn't going to. And because she was terrified. And then at that moment she sort of went zombie-like, like just completely tilted, relaxed, pulled over the car. The people in the back, once we were pulled over, weren't moving. It was almost like they were in suspended animation somehow. It was very odd. And behind the car, I can see it as if it was yesterday. These two balls of light, about this big, hovering just above, mostly right at the back bumper. And then when I was looking at that behind me, then when I went back to the front of the car, I saw a small disc-shaped object, UFO, on the highway, and little beings that were probably about 3.5, 4 feet tall, 4 feet-ish tall, with round black eyes, smooth skin. They looked sort of white, silvery almost, not grays. These are not grays, the grays that some people are afraid and wrinkled and yucky. That's what wasn't them. These were childlike. And in my mind, I heard in my head a voice that said, do not be afraid. We will not harm you. Do not be afraid. Get out of the car. And so I watched myself, getting out of the car. And then they came up and they took me by the hand, which felt as cold as taking a soda can out of the fridge. That's what it felt like. And they led me down the road. At that point, the UFO that was on the highway had already gone, and they led me in that direction. And on the left-hand side of the road was a huge UFO. And I walked up an embankment with grass. And as I was walking up, I saw what looked like a male and a female extraterrestrial standing in the doorway. I can't define what made me understand that they were male and female. I just knew that they were. But in my head, what I thought was, oh my God, what are you doing here? Why can't you just leave me alone? What a strange thought. And then my mind starts fighting itself. I know it was fighting itself. So then I was taken to the doorway. These little beings left me. They went back. They left. And then I was taken on board the craft by these two tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed extraterrestrials. And they had very elongated faces, extremely large blue eyes, extremely big blue eyes. And the blue, actually, Ethann, looking to the right, my right side, the blue that I can see that's just beside you, that's almost what color. Now, if you make it a little bit brighter again, that was the color of their eyes. And they were very, very powerful, and I could hear them speaking to me all through telepathy. And they brought me into a room that had some kind of a chair, what I call a light chair, that looked like pure light. It didn't look like a chair itself. It looked like just light. And I sat in it, and then in front of me, a huge holographic type screen came up, and I saw images just flashing, flashing, flashing. And with each image came massive information about everything, from physics to consciousness to energy, propulsion systems, time travel, history of the world, history of the universe, the history of humanity, different worlds that have existed, what my purpose was, what they wanted me to do, all sorts of things. So it was really incredible. So after all of this, we'll get into some of this in the conversation, but after I was taken back out of that, off the craft and taken back to the car, immediately, that's when I knew. People ask me this, you've had hypnotherapy, you've been No. I walked back into that car. I was told to take my shoes off and put them in the back so that when I changed drivers, I wouldn't recognize that my feet were wet. So I got back into the car, and as I got into the back of the car, I said, wait a minute, something's wrong. Don't you see them? I kept trying to scream at the people in the car. Can't you see them? Because they were trying to tell me that the little beings standing on the side of the road were deer. And I said, they're not deer. Why can't you see them? Please look at them. They're not deer. And the man that had been sleeping in the back, and now we had changed drivers. First of all, the car was freezing cold. Freezing. They were frozen. And the guy was screaming at the woman who was driving and said, why did you turn off the heat for 5 minutes? Couldn't you have left it on for us to change? So it was all mixed up conversation. Everything was confusing. And I couldn't get them to listen. And the driver, the male, got so angry with me, and he said, if you don't stop talking, I'm going to leave you on the side of the road. All he wanted to do was get home. And not one of us after that said a word until we got back to Vancouver. And then at that point, the man said to me, he actually said to me, maybe we have missing time. And I said, what's missing time? And he said, it's when aliens come and take you away. And I was like, what are you even talking about? So there was a period of confusion and then knowing, and confusion and then knowing for myself, you know? And I thought, is that what they call this? Is that what, you know, my mind was trying to rationalize everything. Now, I know I'm making this a very long introduction, but I think it's really gives the foundation that we need to have a greater conversation, because the gentleman in the car, he contacted me years later, and, you know, we stayed in touch for a while, and then we all drifted apart. But the people in that car, the three adults that were in the car, one of them wants nothing to do with me whatsoever. One of them, I've had in-depth conversation about that night, and what she remembers, she was the driver, she remembers it being cold, that she for some reason can never get over that night, that it keeps coming back into her consciousness for some reason. There were other little things that she remembers, like something weird with the radio. So there are that confirmation there. The man, he recently, within the last couple of years, he contacted me and he told me that he knew something happened that night. He said, even years ago, 7 years ago, he said, I know something happened. He said, because I can't stop thinking about it. And it keeps coming back in my mind, and I can't figure it out. Why do I keep thinking about that night? I can't let it go. Ever since that night, he said, it feels like sometimes it's changed my life. And then a couple of years ago, he contacted me and said that he started having memories come back for the first time, and that he remembers being in the car and him looking, he was in the driver's side back seat, and he remembers looking up and seeing one of the beings at the window, and then he just blacked out, and that's what he remembers. So, you know, this phenomenon can be really frightening to people, and I think rightfully so, and that there's a lot of questions about people like myself, whether we are authentic or making something up. But my experience it goes back to my birth. It goes back to my family. I've had people who have confirmed that when I was 4 years old, a memory that had come back to me from being on the UFO, of being 4 years old in a farmer's field with my sister, 40 years later was confirmed by a family friend. And this was prior to the point where my book was brought into the public. So there's a lot to this history, and that's why it's so important for us to begin this dialogue, because you know, my experience was something that it's been almost 30 years, 1988, so 27 years, and I'm still dealing with trying to fully 100% understand what happened, to understand the full ramifications of that, to fully comprehend the vastness of this kind of interaction and what it is. So when people say, oh yeah, that's all, oh yeah, this is all, I'm a contactee and I talk to them every day. Okay, they may speak to them every day through telepathy or through their meditations, but it's not to be taken lightly. And this is why in our conversation today, Ethann, I think that we'll get into some really interesting dialogue about maybe why this is important for us to understand, because this didn't just happen to me. It changed the life of everyone in that car, and it changed my family's life. It changed the perspective of everyone that comes into contact with me. It changes the perspective and understanding of it sort of stirs within people when I sit down with them, especially face to face. Because if you sit down with me face to face for a few hours, almost no one can walk away and say, yeah, she's insane. Because it doesn't work that way. There's something profound. And there's all these sort of, we want to rationalize everything, and we want an immediate rationalization or explanation. And with this particular subject, it's so vast that it's not possible. I was told by these beings that everything in the human existence in one form or another connects directly to them, meaning they have some kind of influence on it. So if we say they're all evil, then I wouldn't agree with that either, because that would be saying that humanity itself is completely evil and is terrible because of how much we're connected. So it's a very big conversation, and it's a very big concept to understand. For myself, I walked into that situation as a 22-year-old girl, wide-eyed, living a fairly normal life, even though I was very gifted psychically. And I walked off that craft what I would say is a completely different person. Mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. To the point where I even looked slightly different. And when I walked off the craft, I was 1¼ inches taller. That I know for sure as well, because I'd just been, my height had just been measured by a doctor a few months prior. And someone said, you seem taller. And I measured myself. I was 1¼ inches taller. I've never gone back down, by the way. I didn't shrink back down. I get asked that too. And so, and also one of the points here that's very interesting is that in my childhood, I had a difficult upbringing because my father was a veteran of the war, the Second World War. He was very young when he was in that war. And so he had his demons. Brilliant man, though, very brilliant man, very psychically gifted also. He is part of this story as well in many, many ways. It gets interesting. But my childhood, I didn't have an education because I left home at a very young age, and I was denied the right to go to any kind of schooling. They wouldn't let me. So I have a completed grade 7 education. That's it. I have no other education other than that. So when I walked off the UFO, I walked on one way. I walked off the craft, having the ability to have conversations with physicists that were blowing their minds, that was so astounding that one conversation about approximately a year later with a physicist who worked at UBC, University of British Columbia, he was talking about certain things with me, and I was saying to him, oh, don't tell me. They were doing experiments with, I don't know, protons or something. I never get the language straight. That's my problem. But having those conversations, and I was saying, oh, don't tell me what happens. This is what happens. And then I started saying, oh, but you need to be careful when you do this and this and this about this. And he said, how do you even know that? Scientists are just touching on that now. Another confirmation of this information and understanding that was shared with me is a dialogue that I had in 2009 with a friend who I just met at the time, and we had a 2 or 3 hour long conversation about time travel. And I spoke to him about how time travel works and how it works with light and the protons and it was really in depth. And I gave him all this information for 3 hours, and he was blown away. And it took approximately another, I think, 4 years or something. And there was an incredible, it was about the folding of space and how that creates time travel. And it has to do with the speed of light. And it's really complicated. And there was a huge article that came out in a scientific magazine, and this friend of mine flipped out and said, "Oh, Miriam, there's this article, every single thing that you said, absolutely every detail was written in the scientific magazine by the physicists." He said, and here's what he added, "But your information is still more detailed." So when people say, I came from, you were in the environment to have this kind of situation, that's not the case. That you had a certain type of education, that's not the case. I was a very average person, and I was just like any person that's out there watching this. I was normal. I got up in the morning and had a job. My mind was free to think about flowers or what I was having for dinner. I walked off completely changed and understanding our connectedness. So it's a very long introduction, and I thank you for the opportunity to share it with that much detail. And I just want to say before we even go into the dialogue that I wrote a book that's available in 4 languages now, and it's free to download on my website. And it gives the absolute base of the story. And I extend that gift to everyone watching. So please go and download 4 languages: English, Portuguese, Spanish, and Japanese. So thank you for this time to share this, Ethan.
Sure. And what is your website?
It's bluestarprophecy.com.
Okay, great. I'd like to back up a little and get some detail on a few different things that I had questions about. For example, in this conversation, there are 2 opposing sides. There are people who call themselves contactees, and there are those who consider themselves abductees. One, obviously, in your case, you probably would use the terminology contactee, whereas a lot of people have very negative experiences or negative ideas as far as the whole extraterrestrial contact experience. And so I'm wondering, and I've heard you say that this is a privilege for those who have had this kind of an experience, and that that they had chosen to do this beforehand, and they knew that they were going to be called on to do this. So can you give some clarity as to why some people have such a negative mindset about it and a negative experience versus your experience?
In the beginning, I called myself an abductee. And an abductee is someone who's taken what they feel that they're being taken against their will, that the experience has a very negative effect, I think. Someone who is constantly without their conscious acceptance of the experience as being taken and having these experiences. Abductees are also often share stories about different kind of experimentations and things like this that are being done to them that are very frightening as well. Contactees are people who consciously say, yes, I'm going to allow this into my life, and they walk away from the experience in a very positive way. I don't know, I have to say this, I don't even care to term myself fully as a contactee or fully as an abductee, because at moments I never wanted that. Did I want to walk on board that craft and have my life changed? No. I was fighting it, and I fought it for a long time, and I'm still fighting it. So those terms are difficult for me to personally connect with either one of them, because the phenomenon was so impactful on my life. It changed me so drastically that sometimes, even though this beautiful message comes out of it, and I have such blessings from this, such blessings, I still look at people in my circle of friends, for example, who have families, and they go on vacations together, and they can go and just relax and look at the ocean and have a wonderful holiday. Whereas I do that and all I think is, we're destroying the earth. What are we doing? How can I how can I help this planet and help us to grow? So the terms are rather difficult for me to connect with. I think it's more, we have to start looking at first of all, in this phenomenon, I believe that each case needs to be looked at as an individual first, and nothing broad. We have to look at each case individually. Then we can start to attach different parts of this phenomenon onto it, because it does get very confusing.
So do you think all abductees or contactees had an agreement to have this sort of contact occur, or are the ones who have had the more negative experiences in fact being taken against their will?
No, I don't believe that everyone. See, for myself, one of the things that happened was, even before I came into this body to be born, I had a memory come back to me, which I don't question, just because of the nature of how things are with myself. That when I was with these beings in '88, there was a memory. They gave me many memories of my history. They gave them back to me, and they said, "Here, remember." And some of those things in this physical world, those were the things that were confirmed by other people. So one memory was me standing in front of a council of beings. And people often say, "Oh, it was the Council of Light or the Council of Nine," or no, it was just a council of beings. And I said to them, I will not fail. I promise I will not fail. And they said, "It's very difficult once you go into the body." And I said, "I will do everything within me to fulfill my task. I agree. Send me back." So that was part of my memory. So that's an agreement before I came into this body. Other people, I do not believe at all that 100% of all of these people had an agreement prior. I don't believe that, because that says that every single thing is already set, and I don't believe that. That's where free will comes in. We do have free will, and because we also have free will, there are aspects of this phenomenon that are very negative, and some of these beings that abduct people and take them and do experimentation, such as certain types of greys, for example, they're not positive, and so I don't believe that there would be that upfront agreement. I do feel that every single person that has these experiences, whether they're positive or negative, has the ability to be able to have such a greater, vast understanding of life itself that they can benefit from it. That there is the potential to benefit from it. But that doesn't mean that the experience itself was positive. And I have to say that I do believe that this technology of the crafts, the UFOs, and so forth, that is in the hands of different groups on the planet. And I think that they are also taking people and doing experimentation with the facade, the veil of being extraterrestrials when they're actually human beings. So there's that as well.
I see. You said you were speaking to the council, so were you one of those beings then, or what? Do you know what I'm asking?
Well, within ufology itself, what we call ufology, the looking into UFOs on all the different levels. In ufology, there are a lot of people who talk about the Galactic Council and the Council of 9 and the Council of 12 and the Council. We need to use some caution when we look at those things. We have to be able to relate to what it is that we are experiencing. So yes, I was standing in front of a council, and this particular council had to do with me. It's difficult for me to share what it is that I kind of understand about this, because the way that the universe is built, and I'm going to say this up front, what I'm going to be sharing with you is not my own. I didn't learn it from other human beings, okay? I haven't taken courses with other people and to be able to understand this. Most of what I share with the public is direct information from these extraterrestrials. So the way that the universe is created, it's created in chaos and is organized at the same time. And there are different levels and dimensions that coexist at all times. Past, present, and future are one. Different dimensional levels are there. And there is an area that we pass through as we come into body, and then we pass through it once again when we go out of body, when we leave this world. Before you go into that, there's an area, it's like let's call it a holding space, where you have counsel. And you're counseled. Okay, so you're going into the world, you're ready. Let's take a look at some of the things that you've chosen to do, that you've chosen to bring with you, the attributes that you've chosen. We're going to also give you some of this. It's like creating a play. It's like creating, putting the ingredients together to give that soul, that being, the experience that they want. And if that soul chooses to be in service to others, then that conversation will be presented just before you go into body. So yes, there's a council there. Throughout my experience, throughout my life, in meditation, prayer, dream time, with these extraterrestrials, I've had literally hundreds of experiences in other dimensions, in other worlds and realities that are extraordinary. And what I've come to really understand is that part of what we do is we use our mind, our physical, human, rational mind, to create in front of us an image, physical image that we can relate to and understand. And through that is an interface to be able to get to a deeper consciousness. And I hope that makes some sort of sense. But there are different councils and groups within those dimensional levels. And I have had some very powerful, beautiful experiences with some of those beings that are definitely not of this world, and divine beings, very, very divine, beautiful beings.
But not just anyone could access those councils, right? Do you have to, I would imagine your consciousness has to match the council in order for you to even be on the council? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, it's all about the frequency of the energy, and this is actually a very interesting area of knowledge that they shared with me, and I love it. It's one of the most fun things to be able to talk about, and it's also the most important. Everything in the universe is made up of molecules, and the molecule, if you can imagine this, it's very easy to imagine, really. Just imagine little bubbles everywhere. Molecules, whether we're talking about air, whether we're talking about our bodies, trees, the universe, the stars, everything. Everything has molecules, even when we get into the other dimensional realms. Now, if you have if you set up a bunch of glasses, one would have, imagine that one is jam-packed bubbles, molecules, and they're all squished in there, and that's really dense and hard and heavy. The next one gets more and, less and less and less. And then some of them, those molecules will be fatter or smaller. Some of them will be very dormant, where they'll sit very still and not move. And then others will, shake and rotate really, really quickly. These are what we call higher vibrations. Now, when I was on board the UFO with the extraterrestrials, and this is something that I've talked about quite often, where their energy itself, it's like sitting beside an electricity. You can't get too close to live wire electricity because you can feel it, and it makes a sound. It's the same with these beings. If you physically come into contact with them, and I repeat this, physically come into contact with them, you will experience that energy that they have that's almost like a live wire through their molecules that just get released. And it moves into this physical body that, that I have, for example. It moved into me and then sort of shook up my molecules within my body. And it's very hard to be around them because it's like oil and water. So it's like a frequency. You can't stay in their presence because we'll break down. Our bodies would break down. They wouldn't even be able to handle it. Now, is this true of all the extraterrestrials? No. There's certain branches of them and beings that's not the case. These ones, the ones that I call the tall blondes, or I prefer to call them the great ancestors, these ones have this very high vibrational level. So when you're talking about going into other dimensional realms, it is more challenging to get to be able to speak to some of these beings unless you do have the ability to match that energetic frequency. And this is extremely important for our personal evolution as well. 30 years ago almost now, 27 years ago, I would tell people, oh, well, when I walk down the street, I just imagine myself letting droplets go wherever I walk. And that's what we are all doing as awake people, as consciously spiritual awake people. We are letting those droplets of our own energy sort of enter into the space that's around us. And as each individual wakes up, they begin to release those molecules of a higher vibration. Well, sooner or later, when one vibration goes into the glass that's really densely packed, it sort of starts to just shake the next one. Oh, wake up. And then it starts to become a cascade effect. This is why when we talk about global consciousness or global meditations for peace or awakening or prosperity or whatever the case may be, why it has that effect, why it actually does affect the world around us. And this is a very important message from these beings that I've had contact with. And in many ways, it's an important message from a lot of, quote, contactees who feel that they are having these interactions with these beings primarily through meditation, prayer, and dream time, and through the astral world when we can, part of us leaves our body when we have these interactions. So energy is extremely important to that. And so we do have to match that frequency in order to be able to sit with some of those councils. Definitely.
Now, these tall blondes and the grays that you described earlier, these are all multidimensional beings, I assume. So why is it that you saw, and what I'm trying to understand is, did your mind try to interpret what you were seeing as beings, or did they, for example, you saw these two white lights chasing the car, and then later on you saw these gray childlike beings, and then you saw these tall blondes and the large ship. Were you really seeing those things? Did they actually have physical manifestation? And why did they even need to show you those things if they're multidimensional beings? Is that for your own benefit, or was there some other reason why you saw it in that way?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. Fantastic. No, this was a very real manifestation. There were some people that contacted me after I wrote the book in 2007. Late 2007 was when I released it. And it was at that time, I think it was about I don't know, gosh, 2010, somewhere in there, someone contacted me and said, right at that time, there were massive sightings of UFOs in that area, and that it had been written up in the newspaper or something along those lines. I can't remember. I'd have to go back into my notes and look, but there was confirmation of that for me. Again, confirmation that it was real and that it was something that was physical. The thing, it's challenging. This is such a challenging subject because, as I said earlier, the mind tends to create something that we can interface with. So we have to first question, is this that? Is this my imagination creating this in order for me to understand? Or is this and was this something real? And if it was real, on what level was it real? Was it real for my mind, or was it real for me physically? Physically, what I say when I say physical, it means that if there's 1,000 people standing there, they're all going to see the exact same thing. There's no change. We're all going to see the same thing. So that's something that's physical and real. Astral means that you're the only one that's going to see it because you're the only one there. That's something that's sort of spiritual, coming from being out of the body. But that experience in 1988 was definitely, absolutely physical. They gave me some memories of other things, and I'll touch on these now and then get to the second part of the question about why they came for me physically. So if I forget, because I tend to go into many directions because there's so much to share. When they took me on the craft in 1988, they showed me a history. So when I was 4 years old, there was a physical encounter that happened with my sister. And when I started to tell a very old friend of mine from childhood, the parents of a childhood friend, they said to me, oh my gosh, there was a man who lived down the street. For 2 years, he said he could have sworn that he saw a UFO. And I said, where? And she said, and this was before she read my book, before she knew anything. I didn't tell her any of the details. And she said that it was hovering over the old barn in front of our house. So that's a confirmation of something very physical. Then when I was 9 years old, I woke up, and around 9 years old, I woke up and I'd had this really crazy dream, quote unquote dream. And I found my mother and my older sister sitting at the kitchen table, and I started telling them, and they said, what? We had the exact same dream, that there was a UFO that landed in our backyard. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. Then my other sister woke up, and we waited to see, and we asked her, we said, did you have any dreams last night? And she said, yeah, I had this weird dream that there was a UFO in the backyard. So that was 4 of us that had woken up all at the same time from a quote unquote weird dream. So was it physical? Well, I don't know, but we certainly all had the same dream. Then when I was 16 years old, I was on a logging road out in the middle of nowhere with 2 people. And we all saw what we thought were meteors fall from the sky and then travel parallel to the earth. And we, as soon as it started to travel parallel to the earth, I was screaming like, that's not normal. What's going on? And that was almost the end of the memory. And then all I remember is getting back into the car, and we were freezing cold, and, I ended up getting really violently sick after that for some strange reason that I didn't understand, and it was not nice. Then the next time was when I was 22. So the physical interactions for me absolutely have been ongoing. And this I think is very important because I've had a number of them confirmed that were absolutely physical. And the one was that I have no question about, and that was when I was 4 years old and when I was 22, for sure, physically taken. Why did that happen, and how often do I believe these, quote, physical contacts are taking place? Well, I will say that there's thousands and thousands of people on the internet who talk about having experiences with extraterrestrials. There are millions of people who are actually having these experiences. And out of that group, how many are physically interacting with these beings? I would say that they are probably less than 1%. The reason I say that is because people who are having physical contacts, I don't believe that it's even possible for anyone to have that physical contact and then immediately the next day walk away and have what I would call a normal conversation. I don't believe it's possible, even today for me, with all I've experienced and all I know. Because remember when we were talking about the energy, right? Well, their energy is so different and it's so fast that it completely changes us. We can't control that in any way. And it takes us years and years to calm and clear and integrate. And I know I've talked to a couple of really, very, very highly public people who have had physical experiences. And a few of them have said the same thing to me, that they just don't believe that a lot of the people out there are having these physical contacts. That it's other means. It's through meditation, it's through the prayers, it's through the astral, which is also extremely normal. And I would like to talk about that because I feel that it's very, very important.
So why did they take, let's take the tall blondes, for example. Why did they take the form that you saw them in the third dimensional form if they're multidimensional beings? Is that form just what they always look like when they project into third dimension, or did they take that form for your benefit because you needed to see them in that particular form?
I've never been asked that question before. I would have to say that from everything that I know, I think that's what they actually look like. I think that's the form that they are in, regardless of where they are, and that form was not just a projection for myself, in order to be able to relate to them. And I believe that form, for these particular beings, the ones that I call the great ancestors, the tall blondes, that they have a very, very, very long history with the earth and with humanity itself. And so I know that they used to be on the planet a very long time ago. They used to actually walk on the earth itself at some point. And so, and they were in that form. That's what they looked like. So do I know that for sure? No, but from everything that I do know about them, I would have to ascertain that is the form that they actually are. Mm-hmm. But that's an excellent question.
I'd like to talk, you spoke before, I don't think you mentioned it here, but I've heard you talk about how the tall blondes were sort of in charge of what took place, and the short grays were almost like the workers. And but I'm curious, in our society or in our current modern world, we have hierarchies where we have leaders who tell the followers what to do, and the followers are generally not at the same status or authority level of the leaders. And I guess I'm wondering, in their structure, is there that kind of a hierarchy, or are they more functioning as a collective, and the tall blondes are maybe more like just a manifestation of the voice of the collective? So it's not that there is any particular hierarchy, but rather they're all functioning as one collective?
I don't believe that there is a hierarchy. There is definitely a hierarchy. There's no question about that. Even when we're talking about different, quote, races of beings, there is definitely a hierarchy as far as spiritual knowledge. And I think their ability to communicate that spiritual understanding. Because we can have understanding of technology, for example, and not have any spiritual understanding. These particular beings, when we're talking about the tall blondes and the shorter ones, the tall blondes are definitely more mentally vast in their knowledge, and the smaller ones, I've been asked if I thought that they were even alive, whether I thought that they were even alive or not. And I'm not sure about the answer to that. They didn't really speak to me. They were definitely seemed to be helping the tall blondes. And so it is an interesting question to one, and the answer to which I don't actually know. But I do know for sure that there is a hierarchy with the different races of extraterrestrials, because I've had encounters with other types of beings, some of which were very, very frightening for me. One of them was with a reptilian in the astral plane that it just terrified me. But it only terrified me because of the way he looked. I don't remember him doing anything bad to me. I was just terrified. And that was in the astral. That was a whole experience in itself. So there is definitely a hierarchy, because whenever I see the tall blondes, they're always talking about spirituality. They're always sharing information about how to awaken myself, humanity, how to be kind to myself, how to be patient with myself, how to awaken the broad mind and expand out into the universe. They're always sharing that type of information. I've never had any kind of, even within my dreams or meditations or anything, ever encountered the small ones again, whereas I have with the tall blondes. Mm-hmm. So
you've mentioned your sister and your mother have had dreams, and your father, of course, has also had some experiences. So it sounds to me like contactees are part of a lineage, so that it carries forward throughout families. Is that always the case?
It's not always the case, but I would say that 99% of the time, there's 98% of the time that there's lineage there, and I'll talk about that a little bit. 1988, I'd already made that determination that it was through family lineages. So whenever I heard anyone talking about what had happened to them, we already knew that it was through family lineages, because the mother or the father or both were highly psychic. They were always a little different. They lived off grid, this kind of mentality. Now, in my case specifically, I recognized that immediately because my father, he was psychic. He talked about strange, different things. He talked about the world and what kind of responsibility we had for the earth and so forth. And, I do believe that it runs through lineages. I believed it for that reason. It was like a confirmation to see my father. It was a confirmation when I would meet really gifted other people back in 1988, 89, 90, who were having experiences. They too talked about it going through their family history. So that became clear. But the question is, why? Why is it through the lineage? What's happening there? And that can be answered by some of the information that these great ancestors shared with me. And what they said was that in the very beginning of the existence of the planet itself, there was the planet. It was a planet, and it sat here. And from wherever these beings came from, whether it was interdimensionally or physically or both, or they came and they helped to seed the planet of life. this planet Earth. They helped to seed it. I could get into a lot of detail. We can go back to this a little bit, but when I was on board the craft on board the craft, and I had that information being shared with me, they said that they were the caretakers of this Earth. They were the caretakers of this Earth, and because of all of the information that they shared with me, I actually asked the question. I said, "Are you God?" And they said, "No, we are not God." And I said, "Do you know God?" And they said, "We seek to know God, the source of all things, in the same way that you do. The difference between you and us is that we have a much bigger, bigger understanding, vast understanding of the universe and how it interrelates. And so we also receive the guidance of God Creator for our path." So the same way that a guru of some kind would sit in meditation and then receive spiritual knowledge, they also receive knowledge. The same reason why, Ethann, you and I are sitting here together today is because we both felt it within our spirit and our soul to a calling to do this work. It is in the exact same way that these tall, blonde, great ancestors also had their calling to come and do this work with the Earth, except a much, 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 much more connected, clear understanding. So when they came, they said that they started to seed the Earth of life. And through that seeding of life, they had the first world, what they called the first world, that they allowed to just evolve, and nothing really happened. There were only, little microbes that started to grow, and it wasn't enough. So then they created the second world with more seeding of plant life and animal life. And they allowed the animals to see if they would evolve and become conscious. And nothing happened. And not enough happened. So they decided to cleanse the world. This is what they told me on board the craft. They decided to cleanse the world and then start again. And in this third world, they created beings that were similar to them. So we are the reflection of them, you see? So the beings help to create the physical bodies that we reside in, to reflect more of what they look like, and then more of what we needed to be on Earth to give us consciousness. Now, in this third world, the way that the body was created, the physical form was created. Remember, we talked about the energy, the molecules, and how they vibrate. The higher vibrational rate, the more that they can physically travel into the universe multidimensionally. The physical bodies that we have to be taken care of and be trained in order to accept that type of energy. That's why people go into monasteries and meditate and do the training in order to train our physical bodies to then be able to balance and connect with the non-physical aspects of who and what we are. Then we can travel back and forth and move throughout the universe and the dimensions. When these beings came and they started to do this in the third world, they created these bodies that were very easily able to travel, and they had vast knowledge. But these beings, the human beings, began to create technologies in the world that could potentially affect rip apart not only the Earth, but also tear rips into the dimensional worlds because they were so powerful. So they had to do something, and then this is the story that was told to me by the great ancestors. They wiped out that third world. And from that third world, they went and collected different people that were living in the right way with nature and living in balance with the universe and living in balance with honor and respect of all life. That was the indigenous, that some of them, they took off the earth. Then they created the fourth world, which is where we are now. And through that fourth world, lineages were created in order for them to be able to recreate the human being. So they're looking for the divine perfected balance of the human body and the human being to live within the dimensional worlds and to be able to have access without it being destructive. And to be able to have access so that it is with balance and with understanding and with respect for all of the worlds, and not to be too dependent on one or another. So lineages were created, and they said that they created different lineages of human beings, and that those blood DNAs, they would track throughout history. And that, for example, at the very beginning, my family was one of those beginning lineages. And then they'd have children. So in the beginning, they probably tracked all three children. And then it just would continue to go from there. And as it branches out, they can continually keep tracking those children. Now, if I had children, which I do not, but if I did have children and I had 3 children, they may not track all 3 of them, but they may track one of them. And every once in a while, new awakening DNA is then given to a pregnant mother. Now, I know that people talk about these DNA projects and how we're being messed with, but let me be clear on this. If the process was doing harm to humanity by causing them to become stupid, unawake, uncaring, malicious, hurtful, damaging, then I would be the first person to jump up and down and say, oh my God, this is all evil and dark and it's a terrible thing. But that's not the case. People who are having these experiences and who have had this in their history are the ones that are often very intelligent. They are thought-provoking. They are spiritual or even religious. I'm not going to say that they're not religious just because of the word a lot of people are afraid of in this community. But they become conscious that they are responsible, and that they are responsible not only for themselves, but for their communities, for their families, for the world. That they're responsible for the earth, and that they take on a responsibility for the earth. That they become broadly aware of the issues that our world is facing on a social and economic, a spiritual, in all of these ways. So this is very important. It's a very important point. So how is UFOs related to daily life? It is in every way possible. And the lineages of these extraterrestrials, that these beings that I had contact with and still have contact with to a degree, when they come and they're taking the mother and maybe doing what they call, DNA experimentation, what is the purpose? And what is the purpose? How is it being done? What is the purpose and what is the result? We can't just look at the fear-based aspect of it and say, oh, well, my God, they're messing with us and we shouldn't allow them to, and it's all evil and dark and horrible. We have to say, who's doing it? Why are they doing it? What's the purpose? What's the outcome? And then we have to say, well, if that's the case, then we have to rethink God in the sense of religion, what and who and how God exists. And, these beings didn't say that they were God. They didn't say that they were replacing God, because that's not the case. But if we say that this is all evil, then then I would look at that individual and say, well, you better get out of your body, because you knew when you came in that it was extraterrestrial. And if we look at the Earth itself, we are the only aspect on Earth. We are the only we are the only matter on Earth that doesn't even know how to live in balance with everything else around it. Whereas when we look at ecosystems, whether we're talking about rivers, oceans, bugs, even viruses, anything, if it's left in nature, there's a natural balance to it. Even when things get, one area of the natural balance becomes, bloated, it all of a sudden, something will come to correct it, and then it will rebalance itself. So everything lives in that natural balanced state, except human beings. So when we're saying that, how can anyone say that the DNA and what they're doing is wrong completely? We have to ask the question, who's doing it? Why are they doing it? What's the outcome? Because even in saying that, some of the people who have all of these experiences, an abductee, a person being taken against their will, having a negative experience, often talking about experimentation being done on them. I don't believe that some of these are extraterrestrial. I think that they're being masked as being extraterrestrial. So that's why I'm saying we have to look at each individual case of a person who has had contact with beings that are, quote, not of this dimension, not of this world, not of this place. And we have to look at the person with everything. What's their history? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? What's the story they're sharing? What is the purpose? What's the outcome? Are they questioning everything, or are they just making a fantastical story? Which is fine too, if it's non-harming to others. But a lot of things within ufology and within the spiritual movement on the planet are becoming challenging, because there are individuals that come in and try to share the information with the public, and it becomes very confusing. And that's why having a more down-to-earth, person-to-person dialogue, like us today, is really important. And I thank you again for the opportunity to come and speak with your audience regarding this very complex subject.
Yes, I'm sure we could talk for hours more about it, but I want to sort of repaint the four worlds that you mentioned, and then I have a question at the end.
Okay.
So these extraterrestrials created these four worlds. The first world was very basic and simple, and maybe single cell organisms and microorganisms, things like that. And that didn't really flourish, so they destroyed that and started over. And the next world, the second world, from my understanding, was like dinosaurs and so on, right? And then the third world, they created beings that were more in their image and more like human beings now. And from my understanding, that was Atlantis and those kinds of societies that were more technologically advanced and got a little carried away, right?
Correct.
And so that world was destroyed by the Ice Age, and I've heard a lot of scientific theories and even modern archaeological discoveries about that it was some sort of solar activity, or it was a meteor or something that caused the end of that world and the move to this world. Well, I'd like to hear your theory on that as well, but I want to continue the scenario a little bit. And from that world, they took a few of the humans that were there, which are the Hopis, right? And into this world. And the question I have, that's the main question, is I've heard you talk about, and you mentioned it briefly here, that the beings in the third world had more electricity in their body. And so they had these higher abilities that caused them to actually, which they were not mature enough to handle in the third world, and so they did a lot of damage, or the potential was there, and which is why the third world was destroyed. And that when we emerged into the fourth world after the Ice Age, which is the world we're in now, we were not given that level of electricity in order to prevent us from destroying the universe or harming ourselves.
Correct.
And now my question is, I assume then that as we are evolving in the fourth world, that more and more of us are developing that electricity again.
Yes.
As we're maturing and evolving and reaching a level of maturity and consciousness where we can handle those kinds of gifts. Because I'm seeing a lot of people around me who I work with and who I'm acquainted with who are having some very unusual gifts, and I'm wondering, are we evolving back to that, what you called electricity and those kinds of abilities in this fourth world?
Just to go back for a moment, just to give again another layer of clarity about all of these worlds. The first world that was created wasn't really destroyed. They just built upon it. The second world, I determined, from the description and what I was shown of that world, that it was definitely the time of the dinosaurs. It had to be. The third world that was created, I do remember some images that they showed me that were really remarkable of Atlantis and Lemuria and all of this, and it was just, it was incredible. I remember I had flashes of just so much light that was available then, so much energy. There were so many beautiful things that were there. And the way that the people dressed was really remarkable, because everyone just looked beautiful. I don't know how else to explain it. How that was destroyed, what I can't say for certain the exact way in which it was destroyed. What I know is that they had to do it really quickly, because there was a piece of technology that was on the earth that had been created that someone was going to sort of, bring online. And if they did, it was going to be destroyed. It was going to destroy everything and rip apart space and time. So they had to act very quickly on that. And I remember that they used natural phenomenon in order to initiate the world change. And so I remember earthquakes and floods and storms and everything imaginable that was like that. There was this massive shift in what the environment of the earth itself completely changed. So they didn't take some kind of technology from up here and then zap it down to earth in order to do this. It was more like they used the natural elements in order to facilitate what it is that they needed to have done on the earth, and made the environment impossible for the human being to survive, and making it so that some of these technologies were removed from the earth and so forth. But a lot of the technology that they had back then, I have to be clear on this also, is that a lot of the technology that they had was within the human itself. That's where we're going right now, is back towards understanding that we are the greatest technology available here on earth. It's an extraordinary, these bodies that we're in the way that we're created with the mind, the body, the spirit, and the soul, those four things. There's four major parts to us: mind, body, spirit, and soul. And all four aspects of that is what makes up an individual human being. That is a technology right there, how to access all four parts. Put it together, get the engine running, connect it in with the earth, with life, with the universe, everything. So these beings, when they went to change the earth again and come back into this fourth world that we're in now, they had to give it time in order for the earth to settle down and become stable again. And so that's why some of the people were taken off the planet. Some of them went underground. Some of them were taken to other planets. Some of them were taken onto mass motherships, UFOs. Some of them were under the ocean, were taken into places under the ocean. So there are all of those places in the earth, under the ocean, other planets, UFOs. Then at some point, some of them were taken back. They were taken back to the earth. And it wasn't just the Hopi, it was a lot of different indigenous, what I know to be the indigenous groups. This is also why it's really simple. It was really easy for me all those years ago, 27 years ago. I understood that there was a direct correlation between the indigenous and these extraterrestrials. But of course, I didn't talk about that out in the public at that point. And I was very, had to be careful about who I told what to back then, because that was a different environment then. So the indigenous hold a very important piece to this puzzle, but none of the indigenous groups out there, none of them are fully giving information about this completely, because, well, to be quite honest, it's private, and it's also very, very sacred, and it's something that unless there's this really clear understanding of this, it couldn't be comprehended anyway. Somebody comes and they say, oh, there's a UFO and here's a petroglyph and this is what it means. It's like, you know what? That means nothing. There's no connection to anything. And although it's good for us to have that information, the value we place on that is too great. What we have to value is what we have inside. And you understand that's where the true technology is and the true understanding. And what I have learned through this experience in all of this is that there's really nothing that I can't tap into. And I believe that. If I put me in a room, close the door, tell me to meditate for a month, and then let me back out, I could probably tell you, what happened on television for the last month. I can tell you what happened in every country, because if we focus ourselves enough, we have that ability to be able to do that. We can even communicate with people from around the world using that technology. And believe me, I have used that technology on some occasions that are astounding. So, did I even answer the question? I went off there.
That's okay. No, this is all good information. And I did want clarity on some of those points that you made, but my final question was, well, you actually brought up other questions too in the process of explaining that, but which I'll come back to later. But my original question was, are we in a time now where the people, for example, in the third world who had this electricity,
yes,
are we starting to evolve in that direction again now, where we as human beings, or at least those of us who are more conscious, are we starting to develop that electricity again, and as a result starting to come into those gifts?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. That is the exact position that humanity is at right now. We are at another transitional stage. And the point of all of this has been to slowly build that electrical charge, let's call it, for lack of a better term, that electricity within our body, to raise vibration, to raise our ability to make our own molecules be able to react in a different way with our surroundings, whether it be on the earth or on another planet or in another dimensional realm.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, that's where we are currently feeling these massive changes that are happening. And it's not, understand that it's not just because of the extraterrestrial influence, in the sense that it's not just about that. It's about the fact that the sun, the position of the sun in relation to the earth itself, the position that we are within the universe and within the solar system, and the cosmic rays that are coming and hitting the earth itself, all of these things are a factor in the physical form bodies that we are currently in having change. And so all of those things, and then the support also from the extraterrestrials is helping to very, very, very cautiously, carefully raise those that level of electricity or vibration within the physical bodies, so that also the brain has more of a our brains can more easily comprehend the ramifications of what it is that we're doing. In this third world, what I understood is that they understood, yeah, we're all connected, we can travel, we're doing all of these wonderful things, but there was a child, there was an irresponsibility, there was a child that had been given the keys to the castle, and he was told to go, run around, and he didn't understand. There was a lack of responsibility. So that is definitely where we're at. And that is the purpose, and that takes us right back to the point where I was told, if you can't do anything, simply walk down the street, clear your energy, and share with that energy, pull it in from the source, from the place of the heart, from the positive light, bring it in and share it with the world, and you will change the earth. That's what meditations are about.
So do you think there's any danger with we're getting to a very technologically advanced society too now, and there are a lot of technologies out there that potentially could be a problem. Are we, with things such as CERN, for example, almost recreating some of those original things that were happening in the third world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is one of the concerns that they have regarding the different technologies that are coming out, because we are starting to tap into that. So there's a couple of things that are happening. One is that there's an area of physical technologies that are being manifested in people, that people are thinking up, that could help the earth, that are quite extraordinary. And then there's another part where they're thinking up technology that is could completely damage the earth. And we have to be mindful of how much of that technology, how are we using it? What is the purpose? Is it a benefit? And to what degree is it a benefit, or is it doing harm? And absolutely, some of those things with the Hadron Collider, for example, they have I'm speechless at the childish ignorance of the people that are trying to do that, because they don't know what they're trying to crack. I do. I know what they're trying to crack into. And the problem is that if you think about it this way, if you are, you think about an egg, and you take your fingers and you pick up the egg, and you pick it up from the sides and you put pressure on it, it's going to crack really easily, because that's where it's weak. If you take your fingers on the top and the bottom and you put pressure, it's going to be a lot harder for you to crack it just with your fingers. Now think about a molecule, and then within that molecule, another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. Well, it just keeps going, but it does get to a level where within the molecule there's a shell. It's like the egg. There's a shell, and it protects it from the spinning molecule that's within it. And then within that, there's another molecule. And then within that, there's another molecule again. Okay. The deeper you get into the molecule, the more first of all, the more rapid it is, which is the free energy that people are trying to tap into. That's one of the things that they're trying to actually harness, is that energy, you see. So that's one thing that happens. But the other thing is that when you get to a certain level of those molecules, and you crack it open and crack it open and crack it open, and it gets released, here's what happens. When you get to, I think, the third level, third or fourth, I think it's the fourth level of that. I think it's the fourth level. The molecule is no longer round. It's like a spike. And it's just, think of things like electricity popping off all over the place. So it's sharp and pointed all over. And then what happens is it goes and it's popping all of the other molecules. It just keeps going. So it creates an entirely different reality that can shift the structure of things. It can become like solid or liquid, or turn solid objects into liquid, for example, this kind of thing. And it's really dangerous because you can't stop it. Once it starts, you're not going to be able to stop it. It'll just start shifting everything. So we don't want them, we as in the beings don't want them to get to that level, because it'll just shift everything. And so we have to be very, very careful of that. And it's just so childish for them to want to continue to break deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. They shouldn't be doing it. They shouldn't be doing it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. When you were in the light chair on the ship, you described that, they taught you lots of things. And then after you left, that it had changed you in some very permanent ways, including your height, for example, but that it also enhanced your gifts. Now, I'm curious, do you believe that enhancement of your gifts and maybe even the change in your height, was that the result of, does the light chair actually elevate your consciousness, or maybe even did it bring you to another dimensional experience, and having sat in the chair permanently altered the vibration of your body such that so the gifts weren't, I'm trying to understand, the gifts weren't things that you acquired, they were things that almost were gifted to you as a result of elevating yourself, your physical body, to another dimension.
Well, I mean, I was gifted my whole life. It wasn't as though it was being on the craft and then all of a sudden I had the gifts. It wasn't didn't turn on like that. I had them my whole life. What being in the light chair did, and on the craft, was that it enhanced every single gift that I already had. And it was hard for me for a couple of years. It was difficult. Wow. Because, I would just walk past people on the street and I'd be reading their minds, and it was so accurate, and it was something else. I mean, at that point in my experience, I was just in awe of everything around me, because it was so different. It was, my relationship to everything changed. So the gifts became super, super, super enhanced. And then after a couple of years, they started to finally settle back down again a little bit. And now they're very normal. I know that if I meditate for long periods of time, or if I meditated every single day, which I don't do because my abilities and my connection just opens right up very, very quickly. That's remained for me. My ability to tap in has remained very, very strong. So being on the craft made it so that those gifts were very much enhanced. I think the greatest gift that was shared with me was a lot of this history and understanding of energy and how to work with it, and how to share with others how to work with it. I think about it all the time, what how would I have been different if this experience hadn't have happened? And I think I still would have been generally the same type of person, very caring, compassionate, a warrior at times and a fighter at times. Those base aspects of who and what I am would still be there. I think what would have been completely and totally different is that my, quote, psychic ability would probably be lower than it is right now. Meaning, if I would have I've lived this life, this is where my psychic ability is right now. If I would have lived just the average life, I think it would probably be down here. I don't think I would still have as much abilities, as many abilities as I do now. And that is part of the gift. It is part of the gift. But it's learning how to live with that gift as well, because at the same time, it can be quite difficult because, you know, for example, I feel earthquakes at times and I'm very accurate about those earthquakes. And before Haiti happened, 3 days before Haiti happened, I had a massive breakdown in the mountains of Colombia in the middle of nowhere, where all of a sudden I'm standing there having a conversation, and then in the next second I'm almost collapsing onto the ground, grasping for air, couldn't breathe, couldn't talk, tears streaming, and I could hear, see, and feel the destruction of the buildings coming down and the screams and the death and seeing the souls rising. So when people talk to me about being psychic and they do it in a playful way, like, oh yeah, I'm really psychic, and let's bring it back to reality here. This is something to be respected and honored and grateful for. But when you get to that level, it comes with responsibility. And it comes with challenge, because to see those things, to be so open to see and feel those things, it's not easy. So my experience with them, I do not believe that I would have had a lot of the really powerful, let's say, experiences like I did with feeling the Haiti earthquake before it happened, had I have not been with the extraterrestrials. I don't think that I would have that to that degree. But who knows? Because that's all speculation.
So do you believe that the light chair or your interaction with these tall blondes, that in that process you were genetically altered in some way? And if the answer is yes to that, are you, because a lot of people talk about this in these alternate circles about multidimensional DNA and genetic alteration. I'm curious if you believe that that happened to you and that that actually happens to other contactees. And if so, is that alteration something of a three-dimensional nature that we would actually be able to measure in a three-dimensional sense if we were to look at the DNA, or is this a multidimensional genetic activation of some kind?
I think that when we talk about DNA and we talk about the changes that take place when we're on board the craft and so forth, I know that something happened. First of all, let's go back from my history, okay, to the beginning of my birth. I suspect that after my mother and father created me, Miriam, I'm in the womb, I suspect that my mother was taken and the DNA was changed right there. I believe that happened. So I think that I'm sure that I have extraterrestrial DNA. I haven't been tested. One day I'll get it done. You know, we'll see. I think that the DNA that we have within our bodies, people like myself, is very, it gives us the ability to be able to sort of travel between the worlds. It gives us the ability to be able to open up our brains and our pathways in our brains, our physical brains, to then be able to work with our unconscious, subconscious parts of our brain, what I would call the subconscious brain that's up here. And the DNA, when we're talking about the DNA and how I was changed and to what point and where and how, I don't know that I can fully answer why I walked off 1¼ inches taller, and what the purpose of that was, and whether it was changed at that time. I think it's easier to go back to the energy, to talk about it from that perspective, rather than trying to think of it as something, because DNA is talking about blood, it's talking about something physical, and it's talking about the molecules that make up the individual, and that's what DNA is. It's the building blocks. And what happens is that with everything, if you can add or take out different pieces of just about anything, just because, you know, there's a glass of water there, you can take a teaspoon out and it's automatically changed. With DNA, it's the same. You add it or add to it or take it out, and it changes things. With the DNA, with myself, through my experience, I believe that my entire being, and yes, I would say that the DNA was changed because the vibration of these beings, the energy that I was with, caused everything in my physical to change. It had to. It had no choice. You can't put, you can't put two things together and not expect one of them or both to somehow have a change. Sometimes it's non-permanent and sometimes it's permanent. For me, this has been permanent. It's been a permanent change. So do I think that they changed something in me and my DNA? Yes. Do I believe that the DNA of humanity is changing? Absolutely. And they actually talked to me about this in 1988 in the light chair. And they said that humanity's DNA would awaken, and that there were points in the DNA of human beings that one day would all of a sudden just, quote, turn on. So how do we get there, and what do we do? I think that they turned on those pieces of DNA on the ship and said, here you go. Off you go. Changes the way you look, the way you feel, the way you think, the way you see, the way you perceive, the way that you interact. It changes what you do in your life. So how and why are we getting there? Different dimensional realms, whether or not we have different DNA on different dimensions. No, let's not talk about that. That's not accurate at all in my view. We have 4 aspects: mind, body, spirit, soul. And then all of that is related to everything that exists. Mind, body, spirit, and soul. That's what makes up the individual. Now, from that comes branches. So from the soul and from the spirit aspect, that's where we get into the other dimensional realms, or the other worlds that we might exist on at the same time. That's where that comes from. So the soul is the collection of all information, past, present, and even future, that exists. That's what your soul is. Your soul is the collector. It's the bowl that holds everything. It says, this is who and what I am. The spirit is the part that is here and that is you and I are talking with. It is the spirit. The mind is the aspect of the physical body that allows the transference between the body and the rest of the existence, whether it be physically here or into the other realms. And then the body, the physical body, is what holds the spirit in place so that we can have these interactions. So we have 4 aspects: mind, body, spirit, soul. When we talk about the DNA within the physical body is changing on a planetary plant all over the planet, DNA is changing. It's even finally science is saying, yes, it's changing. So that's fantastic, because it's changing for a number of reasons. As I said, the cosmic rays that are coming from the sun and from different parts of the universe itself that are coming through, and they're getting through the filters of the earth and hitting earth and then going into our bodies and changing us. People like myself who have seen extraterrestrials in the physical were changed as a result of it. People who are seeing them in the astral world, when we leave, spirit leaves, the brain takes care of the body and keeps everything functioning and moving forward. Sleeping, sleeping, sleeping. Spirit leaves, goes into the astral world, and ends up making contact with an extraterrestrial, let's say, or a being of some kind. If they are in a certain dimensional space that with a higher vibration, they may bring back some of that energy into their bodies. And then again, it just keeps flowing and changing the DNA. So the DNA is actually a very important part of the evolution of humanity itself. And we are still in the developmental stage emotionally. Let's talk about the emotion of all of this, because emotionally we are learning to accept who and what we are emotionally, because that's where fear comes from. It's an emotion. It's fear, the desire to want to learn more, the ego of thinking that we're all gods. These are emotional aspects of self. So we're in an emotional phase of growing and learning who and what we are in relation to each other, the earth, and the rest of the, of the existence itself. And a lot of this comes from extraterrestrial support and influence, both positive and negative. I prefer to stay on the positive, because whatever you focus on is what you're going to have. So the DNA, as told to me by the beings in 1988, definitely is getting turned on. And yes, the DNA for myself, I think, was turned on at that point. And that my DNA right from birth had already been partially activated, as demonstrated by my extraordinary gifts, psychic gifts at 13 years old. Extraordinary gifts. Because, who else? People started talking about remote viewing, and I was like, yeah, I did that when I was 13. But I didn't know what it was called. I did what they called psychometry, where you hold an object and you feel and you tell the story or the history or something. I did that when I was 13. I could do all sorts of things around that age. Just at puberty, everything got turned on really strongly. So the physical body is very, very interesting. And I just want to make a note of this, that I did a 2-hour had a 2-hour conversation with another interviewer, that we talked about something called the divine brain, and how the divine brain is interlinked with our DNA and it's interlinked with everything. I call it the divine brain. And it's really important that we talk about the divine brain in relation to what we're trying to understand as spiritual beings, as emotional beings, as, quote, contactees and extraterrestrial abductees, all these things, because the divine brain is what allows for us to have understanding of all of this, and also connection to all of this. So once you understand the divine brain, wow, you run. And you are going to physically change, because you can't bring in that energy and then not have it physically change you. And this is why some people who all of a sudden will have enlightenment look great. They look like they're, quote, glowing, or they look younger, or whatever the case is. That is tied directly into the DNA. But the DNA is not every single human being. Some people are fighting to keep that DNA shut down and turned off. And that's what others are trying to help us to keep shut down by, you know, a lot of propaganda. Let's just leave it at that.
So what are some of the manifestations that of this genetic awakening that's happening with people at the present time? And what sorts of gifts and abilities do you think are going to come into being, or that are coming into being? And to expand on that, how can people watching a show like this actually work with that to develop that and to evolve in the right direction?
Well, a lot of this awakening DNA is really shifting the entire planet, and we see that today by the amount of alternative programming that is out there. There are literally, you know, millions and millions and millions and millions of us all on the internet, for example, sharing this information of transformation, of expansion, of consciousness. And so there's evidence that the world is shifting. The evidence is really in everyday life as well, where, you know, even on major programming television shows, they're talking about consciousness, where you'll watch a television show and they'll slip in a line about extraterrestrials. They'll slip in a line about the awakening of humanity. So there is evidence, even in mainstream, that there is a shifting of, quote, conscious understanding. Now, the number of people who are out in the world talking about peace and taking a stand on the environment and talking about the future is also evidence of where we are, how we have evolved. Because 20, 30 years ago, we lived in our little, you know, compact zone of life, and we didn't understand how our actions affected the rest of the world. So there's very clear evidence of that. And that's actually something that they said would happen, was that humanity would awaken to understand that all life is connected, and by doing so would become understand their responsibility and role within that ecosystem of the planet itself. So we have to, you know, we can look at the manifestation there and say that there are, even in everyday life, people, even if they're not doing anything directly to help save the environment, they are most certainly aware that there is a problem in the environment. Whereas 30 years ago, even if there were as many people as there are now, they would still not have been open to say, oh yeah, there's a problem. Yes, there's a problem. Because the physical problems that we have in our world, money, the environment, our water, air, pollution, all of these things, they are not being looked at as there's a problem with pollution. That's not what we're doing. We are looking at it saying, we have a situation with pollution on this planet, and it's harming my spirit and my soul. And what about the future? These are really important things to think about, because our children and our future generations, we're no longer thinking about them as, oh yeah, our children. We're thinking about them as spiritual beings that have a universal right to come here and experience this, and we have no right to destroy this in our current state. So there's manifestation of understanding that's coming forward as a result of all of this information in consciousness and spirituality and ufology, if we want to talk about that as well. There's an understanding of that is manifesting more and more and more every day. Is it fast enough? Maybe not. But we do have free will, and that's where we have to understand that we will either succeed or we won't. No one can tell that yet. We're still in that phase of transformation and change. And the physical manifestation, within each single individual, the more of us that can awaken consciously, the better off we are. There's so much information on the internet and in books and magazines and just everywhere you turn. There's so much information about spirituality and consciousness. And I always say to people that the most important part of awakening is to stop and listen to yourself. It's the most important aspect of awakening self, is to stop and listen to yourself and just observe yourself. That is the most important thing. And then whatever thread of information one seeks, whether it's going to be about UFOs, extraterrestrials, consciousness, spirituality, alchemy, any one of the esoteric subjects that's available out there, go ahead and listen to anyone and anything. Watch 1,000 YouTube videos, but only accept as truth what feels right and good for you. We do not have to agree. We do not have to fully understand. What we do is we just take in what we know feels right and feels good and feels positive, and just stay on that positive path, because in this field you can go into conspiracy theorists and get into the heart of that and go down rabbit holes and be blown away at what's really happening on our earth. And the conspiracy aspects, you can go down in any one of them. So which one do you want to stay in? Go and learn that, come back out, and then start to learn something else. And only take in and continue to focus on what feels right. Because that is what these beings have said is most important. For us to be able to get to where we're going to with our consciousness, with our super consciousness, with our physical beings, with our DNA transformations, and with all of it. And there are many things that are coming for the planet. This is something that they've shared with me as well, is that all of this talk about extraterrestrials are going to, walk amongst us and so forth, I don't believe is going to happen. And if it does, we have a long way to go before humanity will be ready for that. A long way. There's a lot more DNA upgrades that we're going to need, and a lot more understanding spiritually before we can ever get there. Knowing, through personal experience, that having had this interaction with them, it just simply would not be possible. It's not possible. And so understanding this as well is that some people have tried to, for example, talk to me about the tall whites. They call them the tall whites that live under the earth in certain areas. These are not the same beings that I've had contact with. They're not the same. So be very cautious about the details of what you're listening to and be clear about that. And one of the other recommendations that I make to people is that if you can get away without having some kind of regression, do that first. If you're trying to figure out something that happened to you, don't jump on the bandwagon right away to go and get a regression, because look within yourself and learn to meditate and slow your thoughts down and try to connect with yourself to ask questions first. I think that that's one of the most important steps in awakening. And, just be respectful of other people's opinions about, what they think, what they're sharing, because the possibilities of experience are limitless. And that means the possibilities of the perspective from another angle are limitless. And we can never fully comprehend those those perspectives and understanding of where another person's coming from. So it's about respect and gentleness with yourself first, and just start slow, because people look at me and they think, oh, it's so easy for you. And I was like, are you kidding? All those times I was crying, I don't understand what's happening to me. What's going on? And I had to stop and slow myself down to try to reconnect with the more simple aspects of myself.
I want to clarify something. Now, you said that you don't believe that these extraterrestrials are going to be walking among us anytime soon. Now, I've spoken with a lot of people, and I'm sure you have as well, some who say they've had physical contact with extraterrestrials who actually do live on Earth currently. And so I guess I'm trying to understand, is it, do you disagree with that, or do you think that there maybe are extraterrestrials at multiple different levels of consciousness, and the ones that you're communicating with are at such a high consciousness that in order for them to coexist with us, our Earth consciousness and all of us on it would have to match where they are, and we're nowhere near that at this point? Is that...
Ethan, I'm so glad you caught that and asked this question, because it does need clarity. There are extraterrestrials that do walk amongst us. That's absolutely certain. And they do have very different electrical, energy. And so some of them can walk amongst us. Absolutely. It depends on where they are in that hierarchy that we talked about, and whether or not they are primarily, for example, primarily based in another dimension or primarily based on Earth. Now, if they're primarily based on Earth, that means that their energy signature is going to be more closely matched to the Earth itself, so they would be able to walk amongst us. There's a difference. Whereas these tall caretakers, the great ancestors, they're primarily based in another dimension, and I don't see that coming and walking amongst us anytime soon. Not at all. And I also see that some of the other beings, extraterrestrials that people have talked about, I just don't see them walking amongst us, like the grays that people with the wrinkly, I don't see that happening anytime soon, because it would be the clash between us and them. It would just simply not be possible. So we have to understand that when people say to me, oh, are they going to land and live amongst us? I'm like, are you kidding? No. Are they openly going to be walking amongst us? No time soon. Are some of them walking around? Yes. And I've seen a couple of them, and it's very interesting. And I've known a couple of people who have seen them as well, and there's just no question, you're never they are here. So will they all over the planet all of a sudden arrive and start living amongst us? I don't believe that that's going to happen, because otherwise we won't be the Earth anymore. We won't be humanity, not the way that we know it. In hundreds and hundreds of years from now, possibly that will happen.
Mm-hmm. So basically it's just a dimensional thing. They can't coexist with us until we can catch up with the dimensional level that they exist on, right? Is that what you're saying?
Until we get closer, yes. Yeah. We don't necessarily have to be equal, because I don't know that that's even possible, but we definitely have to catch up and be able to deal with the energy their energy signature, what it is that they're around. You can't take electricity and water and put it together and say, oh, that's going to work well. It's sort of like that. Their energy is so different. That's what it does. It zaps us. And until there's more of an equal balance on that, yeah, we have some work to do before we can get there, for sure.
Well, this may be too big a question, but I'm going to say it anyway. You said that you learned a lot of things from them, and there were a lot of things that they wanted us to know as a human civilization. Can you share with us some things that we might not have already discussed that you think are important for the viewers of the show to know and to learn as we move forward into the future?
Well, the message that they gave, it's all of it, but sort of simplifying the most important pieces of their message is that we are not alone. We are not alone. That they want people to remember who they are. That we are responsible not only for ourselves, but for everything that is around us and everything that exists. And that at this time frame, meaning not 2012, not today, but around this time period right now, we are singularly and collectively making a decision as to whether or not we will exist in the future. That is the most important message from these beings. To be responsible for the earth, to be responsible for ourselves, and to be responsible for each other. And I know that for the longest time, when I first came into the public, people weren't even ready to receive that simple message. And it's only a few years later and they are. But that is the most important aspect of the message from them. Because if we remember who we are, then we remember them. If we're respectful to the earth and to all life, then we cannot destroy ourselves, and we will go on, not only in this dimension, but in all dimensions. And it has been a very long journey for me personally, one that has been filled with every type of experience. Some of them are just remarkable. And it always comes back to that simplified message for me. Even for me, it always comes back to the simplified message. It's to just be responsible. And I think making it more complicated just makes it more complicated in a longer story. And the responsibility of looking at who we are encompasses spirituality and consciousness and awareness and awakening and a greater appreciation for the life that we have here. My God, this place is beautiful. It's so beautiful. In comparison to other parts of the existence, Earth gives us many gifts that we, after we come here, completely forget. That in other aspects and realms, there is such a great connection between the conscious living wave of energy that exists, that we have telepathy and superconsciousness and awareness. But here, if I want and I choose to use this brain and the divine brain together, the two of them, then I can shut everything out. And if I choose to, I can stare at an anthill for 10 hours and allow myself to be immersed in it. And that's the beauty of this world, is that we can slow it down to experience the beauty of the moment that we live in. And that's the most important part of this. It's the purpose of all of it. If we want to talk about the histories and the UFOs and the aliens and what they look like and how tall they are and where they're from, it all comes down to these very simple things. And enjoying and respecting and honoring the life that we have here. And if we have anything that we can do today, it is to honor life and to respect and really pay attention at this time. Pay attention to the, quote, heart-centered messages of the indigenous people of this earth. Don't listen to the madness and the chaos and the, listen to the heart-centered messages of the indigenous of this earth. Listen very carefully to every word, every syllable, every letter that is spoken from my heart-centered indigenous person. And from there, there is the greatest and most beautiful opportunity to learn about who we are, where we're from, and where we're going, and the purpose of life itself. And although we've been talking about extraterrestrials, that's the message from them. That's their message to me to share with the world. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to have in sharing that today. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned earlier about astral travel, and you said you wanted to come back to that if we had time. Could you elaborate on that?
Oh, yes. Astral travel is very important for understanding this phenomenon and also for understanding our relationship between our physical bodies and the rest of the existence. A lot of people are getting contacted by, quote, extraterrestrials. And when we talk about that, we say aliens, extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them, star beings. There's so many names for them. So light beings, extraterrestrials, okay? When I think about that, or I think about an alien or star being, I think about a being that is either physical or non-physical that I have the ability to interact with on some level. So if it's not in the physical, it means that it's somewhere in the non-physical. So what happens is when we go into deep meditative states, or we go into the dream world, for example, part of our spirit leaves our body, can leave our body, and physically travel. And it can choose to travel on this dimension, meaning the earth, or it can go into other dimensions. It has that ability to shift. When we travel in this way, we can go to a specific place called the astral world. And the astral world in this dimension looks exactly like this. If I leave my body and I come out and I pop out, I'm going to see every single last thing that I see here. It's going to be like I'm a ghost standing beside my own body. Just nobody can see me. That's part of what the astral is. But in that state, we carry a lot of our energy with us. There's a lot of our molecule makeup comes with us, let's say, okay? When we go into the astral world, a lot of people are having contact with beings that are also in that state. So they are very, very, they're in between the world of non-physical and physical. That's the astral world. Non-physical and physical. Astral world's right in the center. So whatever happens in that astral world, there's the physical and the non-physical that are affecting one another. That's what happens, is that so much of the spirit, so much of the energy of the spirit leaves and goes into this astral world. And so whatever it is that happens there, these extraterrestrials can come into this world through, can make contact with this world through that astral space. And when that happens, a lot of people are having experiences with these extraterrestrials, with these beings, and they have a tendency to, for example, do experimentation on them. So some people will be coming back with scars on their bodies that they have absolutely no idea how they got there and where they came from. And then all of a sudden these scars will just simply disappear. Well, the reason for that is because that's an astral contact. Not always, but most of that is astral contact, where the energy that they bring back from that other realm into the physical body settles in, and then that scar pops up. And then as soon as that energy settles down and it sort of smooths over, it turns back into the physical body again, and it's no longer affecting. One is no longer imposing itself on the other. Do you see what I'm saying? So a lot of people who are saying, oh, they pull me away every night, I can't stand it, I want them to stay away from me, leave me alone. You just need to go to sleep at night and do a little prayer of protection, and then ask your protector guides to not allow them to take you. And just keep practicing that and asking them to stay away, and it will work eventually as soon as you find the strength within yourself to send that out. So the astral world is very, very much interlinked to this phenomenon in a very confusing way. It makes everything is very confusing, and it's hard because some people are having these kind of contacts and then they're assuming that they're physical contacts when they're not. Even for me, I'm never going to assume that if I get pulled onto a craft by them, or I have something, that it's a physical contact unless I have it confirmed in some other way. You have to have it confirmed in some other way, because it's too complex of a phenomenon in order to not have it confirmed.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that they showed you a possible future timeline of the Earth, right? And that was a more destructive future?
Yes.
If I remember correctly. Can you describe what that was? And I'm wondering, do you believe that we've actually moved beyond that and actually crossed the threshold to a much better future at this point, or is that future timeline still a potential possibility?
That future timeline is definitely still in play. When I was on board the craft, they showed me several possible futures and timelines. And that particular one was devastating. It was horrific. It was terrifying. It was... Even right now, it almost brings me to tears because it was so horrifying. We don't want to go there. And it's one of the primary reasons that just no matter whatever challenges I ever have, it encourages me to keep going, to do whatever it is that I can to support that not happening. What I saw, what was shown to me was a world where we were on a UFO, and I looked down, and from the windows of this craft, and I, like, it's like through the screen I saw it. I can't even explain how I saw it. And it was as if I was looking down from a UFO onto the world, and I saw it was like a war zone, and people were screaming and begging for help, and children, and it was just pure destruction everywhere. And there was no food, there was no water. People were just covered head to toe in dirt, and there was nothing. And all I remember is thousands, if not millions of people, all with their hands up in the air begging for help, just screaming, and little children, and it was horrifying. And there was no food, no water, no nothing. It was just gone. And we are doing that to ourselves. We are doing that to ourselves because if we don't get a handle on water and food production and using our resources, we are going to implode. And more wars will happen. And those wars are what end up destroying the Earth. It's not necessarily cataclysm, although those are still in play as well. There's potentially more dangers that are coming. One of them being an asteroid. I do know that there's a big asteroid that's heading towards the Earth. And it's going to be really up to humanity as to whether or not we can push it with our telepathy, push it with our minds to not hit the Earth. And so there are those dangers as well. And we are not we're not past the point where we're over that. But we are also, I have to say, we are very close to the point where that final moment of judgment, let's say, is upon us, where there'll be no turning back. It's the set path, and there's nothing that we could do to turn it around. And we are exceptionally, exceptionally close to that. So we have to act very quickly, and in a unified manner and with clarity. Not foo-foo, not speculation, not making up a story. We need to get to work. And we need to do everything that we can to ensure that we're doing what we can as quickly as possible to make that happen in whatever way we can, peacefully and with respect. Very important. But we're not at that point, but we are very close to that, let's call it the day of judgment, where it's determined, yeah, we're going to make it. No, we're not. And if I personally ever get that message that says, yeah, it's done, it's over, there's nothing that we can do, it's the day that I quit, and I'm going to go on a holiday, and I'm going to live the rest of my life and know that I did everything in my power to change it. But until you see me stopping and stepping out and saying, no, I'm done, well, then there's still hope.
When you say we're very close, are you talking about a linear point in time that's in the near future, or you don't really have a concept of how close is exactly?
That judgment day is probably going to come within the next 5 to 15 years.
Mm-hmm. And so do you have an understanding of timelines in the sense that do all timelines coexist regardless? So, for example, even if we do cross that threshold into a more positive timeline future, does the other timeline still exist? And do you understand what I'm saying? Are there two timelines that coexist? Because there, in a lot of spiritual conversations, people have been talking about for a long time that there are going to be two parallel Earths and two different levels of experience, and some people who are not of a certain consciousness will experience a darker experience, and others will experience a brighter future. Does that make any sense to you in the way that you perceive it?
Well, what I can say that I know is that all things exist at once. Past, present, and future do not really exist in the past, the present, and the future, but they are existing all at the same time. Timelines, when we talk about that, there are infinite possibilities at any given moment. The butterfly effect. The butterfly in the forest flaps its wings in a certain way. It affects the entire universe. Literally. The concept of other timelines all happening at the same time can and do exist. But the question is, how do they exist? And that gets into something that goes into really extraordinarily complex physics. Because all the timelines do exist at the same time. That's why sometimes people are so confused about looking at another timeline, and then they start focusing on it. I'm like, what are you doing? You're here. Stop. Like, sit down, have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and let's talk, because we're here. Remember? We're here. If we think about other timelines with the concept of another reality of Earth, honestly, I would say why? Why are we even thinking about that? Because all you're going to do is think over here and then not be responsible for where we are right now. And that other existence does and will exist, but it may only be in a thought form rather than a physical form. And the consciousness, here's what I think that people are picking up on. This is my sort of analysis of this. I'm going to change this a bit. When when people are talking about all these souls are going to be on this other planet, let's say, darker souls and so forth, what I see happening is there in the beginning of life itself, when consciousness was created and life itself, the conscious life was created, including these extraterrestrials, okay? Including these extraterrestrials. And I go into this part of the creation in a program that I have on my website called Spiritual Tools, talking about where we came from. It's very interesting, spiritual tools. But when we were created originally as life, conscious life, we traveled around the universe. Little sparks, aspects of us traveled in different places. So we sort of collected different amounts of information as we traveled through all of the worlds and dimensions and realities in existence. So it's like saying that I do know that there are some souls, some parts of that energy that kind of went off and they're sort of spinning out of control. They're not really gaining consciousness in a way that is helpful, let's say. And I think that at some point there is the possibility that some of those souls are going to be, they're going to be changed. Not from free will, but from a conscious changing as a result of modification in some way from a higher source. That's a scary thought, isn't it? To lose your soul. But don't all religions talk about that? And all beliefs, they talk about that. They talk about the losing the soul, and that you can be changed. And I think that is more likely than a whole other earth that's going to happen. Because darn, that sounds pretty good. Hey, put me in there with the rest of the guys that don't want to do anything and are all, crazy. I'll just have a good time with them, because that's what we do. We just have a good time wherever we are. So that, to me, doesn't make sense. What does make sense, and what I do know from these beings, is that some souls kind of get recycled every once in a while. It's like saying this is completely defective. It's not just about the life that they chose to have a certain type of experience. It's about they've gone there for 10 lifetimes and all they've done is be hurtful, harmful, destructive, violent, harming everything in the existence around them. Let's change this. And so some kind of, let's call it this way, the DNA of the soul, not the DNA of our bodies. The DNA of our bodies is here, but the DNA of the soul will be altered as well. So that is what I can sort of put together with my knowledge of how I would understand and perceive that. But it is a very complex and big question. But do I believe that there were other timelines at the same time? Yes. Do I believe that they are all completely in the physical? No. Do I believe that some of these souls are going to go on to another planet and exist there because they're, they need a bit more, discipline? No. I don't believe that. I don't see that.
So from everything you've experienced in your contact with the various extraterrestrial races, are you hopeful that we're heading in the right direction? I mean, do you think that, obviously we haven't crossed over that threshold yet, but how do you feel about where we are right now?
Oh, I'm very, very hopeful, actually. I'm extremely hopeful. I see that the whole planet is transforming before my eyes. I see consciousness expanding every day. I see awareness. I see transformations in people around me all the time. I'm very hopeful. It is polarity. I see the greatest hope I've ever seen, and I see it there, and I see the greatest destruction. and positive and negative. And what that tells me is that we are on the threshold. We are on the threshold of that 100th monkey of change. We are on the threshold of moving that negativity now that we're beginning to see it, and it's all becoming apparent and into our conscious reality of life here on Earth. Now we get to change it. So absolutely, even with all the negativity coming forward, I see all the negativity coming forward as extremely positive, because it means that we are now being presented with the opportunity to create the change, because we are aware of it. And the first part of change is to become aware that we need change. And it is from there that we can begin dialogue, understanding, and then finding solutions to create those change, those things for change. So I've never been more optimistic, ever. Every year I look at the year and I think, wow, where are we? Great. We are in a very good place for change.
Could you also share again your website, anything else that anywhere else people can find out more about you, or any events that you're doing or anything?
My website is bluestarprophecy.com, and you'll find a number of fantastic videos. I'm on YouTube as well, under Miriam Delicado. And like I said, I have 4 books in Spanish, English, Japanese, and Portuguese, and they are free to download on my website. I think that looking at the divine brain that I did with another interviewer, Bernard Alvarez, would be fantastic, and you'll find that in my YouTube section on my website. And the spiritual tools, if someone is interested, is also available on my website, and I find it to be really bringing things down to simple, to make it so that after 6 hours of listening to the seminar, that you can immediately utilize tools to your own spiritual awakening. And I've had exceptional feedback from people on that seminar, so hopefully some of you will take a look at that. And as far as upcoming events, I work so hard on so many different projects that I don't have an opportunity to travel to events often, but I do podcasts and Skype interviews and so forth that are always on my website, and I hope that you just check it out there. And thank you so much, Ethann. This has been one of the best interviews I think that I've had since I came out into the public, and I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me to have you on the show as well, and I'm sure we'll be working together in some capacity or another as we go forward. Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you again I just want to say to everyone out in the world, I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this program, and for trying to understand concepts that are very, very complicated. And I just would like to say thank you from my heart. Remember to stay in a place of peace within yourself, even when there's chaos. And remember that there is always an opportunity for change. So even in difficult times, know that tomorrow will be different, and that there is still hope in the world. And thank you very much. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Awaken and Power TV with my special guest, Miriam Delicado. Join me next week as we speak with another incredible individual who's standing on the leading edge and changing the world.